In 1939, a group of researchers walked into an orphanage in Iowa. They did not bring medicine, toys, or food. They brought clipboards, pencils, and a theory. They told the children they were there to help them speak better. Within months, some of those children began to stutter, to fear their own voice, and to avoid speaking at all. Officially, it was a study of speech. The children who lived through it later gave it a different name: the monster study. His name was Wendell Johnson, a respected speech pathologist at the University of Iowa. He had stuttered since childhood. He knew the shame, the jokes, the way people's faces changed when he spoke. Most experts at the time believed stuttering was something you were born with, a defect inside the child. Johnson thought they were wrong. He suspected the problem started outside the child, not inside. Not in the tongue, in the feedback, in the way adults reacted to every tiny hesitation. He proposed a dangerous idea. Maybe you do not discover that you are a stutterer. Maybe you are made into one, by people telling you that you are. How do you test a theory like that? If you are convinced it could also help thousands of children like you? Johnson did not run the experiment himself. He recruited his graduate student, Mary Tudor, to carry it out. They needed children who were easy to access, easy to control, and who would not question authority. They chose the Iowa Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home in Davenport, Iowa. 22 orphan children, ages roughly 5 to 15. Some of them already showed signs of stuttering. Others spoke fluently. None of them were told the truth. They were told they were getting special speech therapy to help them talk better. Before the intervention began, the children's speech was carefully rated by other graduate students on a scale from poor to fluent. Then Johnson and Tudor did something that sounds simple on paper and monstrous in real life. They split the children into 4 groups. Children who stuttered, given positive feedback. Children who stuttered, given negative feedback. Children who spoke normally, given positive feedback. Children who spoke normally, given negative feedback, and were told they were starting to stutter. This last group would make the monster study infamous. Mary Tudor visited the orphanage regularly from January to May 1939. She sat with the children one-on-one. She listened to them read, answer questions, talk about school. For some of them, the sessions were comforting. The positive therapy children were praised for their speech, told they were talking better and better, reassured that minor hesitations were normal. They were encouraged to speak, to feel confident, to relax. For the others, the sessions were something else entirely. The negative therapy children were told that their speech was not normal, that they were beginning to show signs of serious speech problems. Every stumble was pointed out. Every pause was criticized. They were instructed to watch every word, to avoid speaking unless they were absolutely sure they could say it perfectly. Some of these children had never stuttered before. Their only symptom was being labeled as stutterers by adults in white coats. The results did not come all at once. They crept in slowly, week after week. At first, the fluent children who were told they were getting speech problems just looked confused. Then they began to hesitate, to correct themselves mid-sentence, to search for safer words. Some of them started speaking more softly. Some stopped raising their hands in class. One girl reduced her speech to whispers. Another became so anxious about speaking that her teachers noticed a sharp change in her behavior. On paper, the data looked like this. Children who received positive feedback generally maintained or slightly improved their fluency. Children who received negative feedback, especially fluent speakers, showed increased hesitations, anxiety, and speech disruptions. They did not all develop full classic stutters. But they did develop something just as real, a deep fear of their own voice. The children in the negative feedback groups did not just change how they talked. They changed how they felt about talking. Reports from the time describe increased shyness, social withdrawal, and fear of speaking in class. Some children began to avoid conversations entirely, answering in the fewest words possible. Others showed signs of anxiety and lowered self-esteem, convinced there was something wrong with them. Remember, these were orphans. They had no parents to reassure them that nothing was wrong. The people telling them, "You have a problem," were the closest thing they had to authority, figures they could trust. Years later, some of the participants described the study as a source of lasting psychological damage. Some sought speech therapy and mental health support in adulthood. When the study finally became public around 2001, several of them sued the state of Iowa, arguing that the experiment had scarred them for life. The court agreed enough to award financial settlements. But you cannot pay someone to erase a childhood of being afraid to speak. The monster study was built on a simple psychological mechanism. You tell a child over and over again, "You speak poorly. You have a serious problem." You highlight every tiny mistake as proof. You make them hyper-aware of every syllable. Soon, the child stops focusing on what they want to say and focuses only on how they are saying it. Every conversation becomes a test they are sure they are failing. Psychologists call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start with a label. The child internalizes that label. Their anxiety rises. Their behavior changes to match the label. The label becomes true, not because it described reality, but because it helped create it. The monster study showed brutally that negative verbal feedback can damage speech, confidence, and identity in children who were speaking normally before. It also hinted at the opposite, that positive, patient feedback can help children who already stutter feel and speak better. The theory was not completely wrong. The way you talk to a child really can change the way they talk. The question is, at what cost? From a scientific perspective, Johnson's idea was bold and important. From an ethical perspective, his methods were catastrophic. There was no informed consent. The children did not know they were in an experiment. Their guardians were not properly informed of the risks. The intervention used deception. It deliberately harmed vulnerable children to prove a point. For decades, the study was buried. It remained largely unknown outside Iowa until it was exposed in the early 2000s, sparking outrage. By then, Wendell Johnson was dead. Mary Tudor expressed regret for the harm caused, and the university issued a public apology. Today, the monster study is taught in psychology and ethics courses as a textbook example of what not to do in research. It helped shape modern rules. You cannot experiment on vulnerable populations without strict safeguards. You cannot withhold informed consent. You cannot justify long-term harm with potential scientific benefits. The most disturbing part is this: everyone involved thought they were doing it for the greater good. It is easy to judge the monster study from a distance. To say, "I would never do something like that." But the mechanism behind it is not just about researchers and orphans. It is about every label you have ever carried, and every label you have ever given. Think about the things adults told you when you were a child. "You're shy, you're lazy, you're not good at math. You talk too much. You always mess things up." How many of those phrases were scientific descriptions? And how many were early drafts of your personality? Now think about the people around you. The child who is difficult. The coworker who is not very smart. The friend who is bad with relationships. What if some of those truths are just monster studies in miniature? Informal experiments we run on each other every day, with casual words, repeated often enough to become destiny. The real horror of the monster study is not that one group of researchers did something unethical in 1939. It is that we are still doing softer versions of the same thing now. In classrooms, in families, online, in comments, sections, and group chats. Every time we turn a behavior into a fixed label and feed that label back into a person, we are performing a tiny, uncontrolled experiment on their future self. The question is not, would you have run the monster study? The question is, who are you quietly turning into a stutterer, a failure, a lost cause, just by the way you talk to them? Before you go, try a small experiment on yourself. For the next 24 hours, notice every time your brain silently labels someone idiot, coward, arrogant, broken, and then ask one uncomfortable question. What would happen if they heard that label from you every day? For a year? If a few months of words could shake a child's voice in 1939, what are your words doing to the people around you right now? In the next video, we're going to flip this mechanism, because the same psychology that can create monsters can also create something else entirely. Not a self-fulfilling curse, a self-fulfilling shield. How do you use feedback, labels, and expectations to protect people and yourself instead of damaging them? That is another story.